I knew nothing about Orenburg lace knitting, hadn't even heard of it when we put together the schedule for this year. And of course, I volunteered to research it to deliver this talk. So this is the first time ever me talking about Orenburg lace. Here you are, a novice. So let's start with the location. Don't know if you can see this map very well. Orenburg is in Russia. It's right, at the bottom of the Russian steppes, this range of mountains that runs down the middle of Russia, the Urals. And Orenburg is down around here. Now, if I'm clicking, should be able to see it relative to that area. So it's right down on the border of Russia, between Russia and Kazakhstan, at the bottom of the Ural steppes. Its location is very, very important in the story of Orenburg lace. Okay? So moving on, let's talk about the history of Orenburg lace then. Right, Orenburg lace began as plain underlayers that were worn by Kazakh and Kalmuk nomads, and the climate, as you can imagine, at the bottom of the Russian Ural steppes is from one end to the other. During winter it's really harsh, and during summer it's really hot. And during the harsh winters they needed something to keep them warm, so they wore these plain underlayers. They were made with goat down. Russian Cossacks came along. They arrived in 1734, and their clothing was not good enough for the winter climate in the unique location that Orenburg sits in. And so they adopted these underlayers that were worn by the locals out of necessity. And then they began to enhance those layers with lace design. And here's the bit that really interesting. Economist Peter Rishkov lived from 1712 to 1777, and he and his wife Elena promoted the shawls as an Orenburg cottage industry. This is a statue of Peter Rishkov that sits in Orenburg. I have fallen in love with this man. This hero of mine was a merchant's son, and he began as a young child to learn his father's trade, and then trained as a bookkeeper. He was one of the first Russians to learn the European system of double-entry bookkeeping. But when you read books, he's not called an accountant or a bookkeeper, he's called an economist or a historian. He wrote books about Orenburg, the local industry, the local people, the local topography, and so on. And he's really famous for that. He was a member of the Russian Free Economic Society. He was a corresponding member of the St. Petersburg Academy of Sciences. He was a really big man, and you can find him in lots of books about Russia and that era. The Free Society that he was a member of, that was consulted by Peter and Catherine the Great about growing the economy in Russia. And this was one of his suggestions for the Orenburg region, was to adopt this local knitting technique as a cottage industry for Orenburg. And they were very successful with it. Elena, his wife, now I've not been able to establish whether she came with him. He, I also should have mentioned, was the administrator for the first expedition to Orenburg by the Russian Cossacks. He was officially the administrator of that expedition, so he was there from the start of the Russian settlement of Orenburg. His wife, Elena, he was only 22 when he was on that expedition, so I don't know whether she was someone he married in St. Petersburg and brought with him, or whether she was a local. But she was awarded a gold medal for her hand-knitted goods, the shawls that she knit, by the Russian Free Economic Society. So that's firmly placing the beginnings of Orenburg lace knitting in the mid-18th century, so the middle of the 1700s. Very, very early in terms of lace knitting traditions. Certainly earlier than was certain that Shetland lace knitting began, for instance. We can trace that back to the early 1800s, but no further than that, really. So then, the 19th century, the shawls gained international renown, that they were very expensive. Goat down that they were made with has to be combed from the goats, and it's an expensive, laborious process. So copies were developed. The lace knitting itself was a very laborious process. There was an English firm, Lipner, not being able to find anything other than this about them, who copied the Orenburg lace designs. They called it, bizarrely, imitation de la Orenburg. So they gave it a French name for what was a Russian. But it was a knockoff. They were producing knockoffs, basically. Orenburg knitter Maria Uskova took along, I think it was 9 lace shawls in total, to the International Exhibition in London in 1862, and she won a gold medal for those. And then out of that, shawl production grew to employ over 20,000 hand spinners and knitters in the Orenburg region, making these very highly valued shawls. But middlemen, of course, came along, drove prices down. The spinners and knitters were earning very little for what they were doing. In fact, it was mostly a barter economy. They were getting tea and tobacco and so on for the shawls that they were knitting. And not, these shawls were taking, a couple of hundred hours sometimes to knit because of the intricacy of them, and they were getting very little for it. Moving on then, the Russian Revolution in 1917 cut off supply into Europe. It became a very isolated country, did Russia, as you will know. So as far as the Orenburg knitters was concerned, that was a disaster for them. They lost their immediate market. The little money that they were making was coming in from Europe mainly, some from America, and they lost access to that market. It was an absolute disaster. But Lenin signed an edict which put handicraft industry equal to state industry, and the Orenburg Cooperative was founded.
Oh, good old John.
Good old Then production was industrialised in 1930. Oh, I should say that in terms of the Orenburg Cooperative, what it was groups of knitters in Orenburg who were getting paid then properly by the government, by the state, for their knitting and their spinning. It wasn't a great income, it was a small income, but it was something rather than nothing, which is what they had off the back of the revolution. Production was industrialised. There were factories that started knitting shawls, but it was a mixture of the centres were knitted and then the borders were hand knit. Yarn was spun on machine but used to make them. Together they formed a combinat, so it was an organised business with bits in the factory, bits and so on. It was on an industrial scale basically, with a mixture of hand spinners, hand knitters, machine spinners, machine knitters, all working together to produce shawls for the market, which was then isolated to Russia. So, of course, any Soviet visitor to Orenburg was expected to go home with an Orenburg shawl. And if they didn't, questions were asked. Sorry? But then, of course, perestroika and the Soviet Union collapsed again. Not again, it collapsed from, the revolution. It didn't even end 100 years after the revolution. It basically cut off the funding, which was the subsidies that we got from the government for making the Orenburg shawls. and therefore access to the markets throughout the rest of the Soviet Union, because all these countries split off where the visitors were expected to buy an Orenburg shawl. Now there was nobody buying Orenburg shawls because there were no visitors from the rest of the Soviet Union. And that ended up in the disbanding of the Kombinat in 1995, which was an absolute tragedy. However, should have pointed out, I don't know if I can go back. Yes. Look at that middle symbol on the top there. And just remember that symbol there. Okay. Coming to it. Okay. Orenburg lace knitting and industry, though, resurged largely due to one lady called Galina Kmeleva, who's a designer from St. Petersburg. She grew up in it when it was Leningrad. Became St. Petersburg. And she produced a book called Gossamer Webs, which was published in 1998. Now, those of you who know about sort of recent knitting history will know that that was actually in a time when knitting was not that big a thing anymore. But she published this book in 1998 that's educated the hand knitting world all about Orenburg lace history and techniques. And I have a copy of that. Yay! Wow. Okay. So I'll pass that round if people would like to look at that, or maybe you'd like to look at it afterwards. It's up to you. We'll have plenty of time because I don't know that we've got all that much longer to go. We'll see.
Did you publish it in Russia then? Or
sorry?
Where did you publish it? Or?
It was through Interweave Knitting.
Really?
Yeah. So,
in English?
In English. It was an English translated book. There are other books out there that are about Orenburg knitting, but they're all in Russian. This is the only English book I've been able to find purely about Orenburg lace knitting. There are other things now. So, for example, there's a scarf in here based on Orenburg knitting, but that's in a book all about different techniques from around the world, which is what we've been looking at. So I'll pass that one around as well at the end. But as you know, knitting has had quite a big resurgence over the last decade or so, largely due to online forums like Ravelry, which has helped to spread the popularity of Orenburg lace. And of course it's been developed, so there's traditional designs, but people have used the techniques and put them into modern designs as well. Hang on. Okay, and good news, the Orenburg Cooperative has reformed. Woo! So there are now once again groups of knitters in the Orenburg region knitting together, spinning together and making Orenburg lace. It's been exhibited around the world. There was an exhibition in 2014 in London of Orenburg lace, and there's permanent exhibitions in the Orenburg Museum. It's the Orenburg Museum of Fine Arts, and so it's actually been catapulted up to the level of being a fine art as far as the Russians are concerned. Orenburg.
St. Petersburg.
So I think it's actually Orenburg is the way they say it. I've been learning a little bit of Russian from my friend Lana. So then, that's the history of it. There's lots of folklore surrounding Orenburg lace. And one of the pieces of folklore is that it started out with Orenburg Cossack wives to relieve them of the boredom. They relieved their boredom by knitting. Well, I don't know about you. I don't knit because I'm bored. I knit because I love it. But yes, I can imagine that the long winters within Orenburg would be quite boring, and knitting would relieve the boredom, but that wouldn't be why I was doing it. There's a tale that a knitted lace shawl was sent to Catherine the Great. She reigned during the late 1700s, and she sent a small fortune to thank the knitter for the beautiful lace shawl that she had received, but she had her blinded, so that nobody else could have one. Terrible. But the knitter had a daughter who passed the pattern on. It's in folklore. We don't know that it's true, really. But that's one of the folklore tales. Oh, sorry, this has gone wrong. Prince Nikolai Pavlovich, who became Nicholas I, was presented with a large shawl on his visit to Orenburg. He was in the early 1800s. And legend is that fit into a golden nut. It was so fine. And then we also had Prince Alexander Alexandrovich, who was also presented with a large shawl on his visit to Orenburg, and that one was rumoured to have been presented to him in a golden egg. Of course, we know all about Fabergé eggs.
Yeah.
So very tied to the Russian royal family in terms of their history. So the legend is that he was presented one in a golden egg. There we go.
An enormous egg.
An enormous golden egg. But was it? We shall see. Now then, so there we are. That's the history and the folklore surrounding Orenburg lace. But it all starts with goats, and this is why the location of Orenburg is really, it's not just about the Russians, the Cossack settlers, it's not just about the local people and their underlayers, it's about the goats. They are unique to the region. Let me just pull this up. The climate in Orenburg, and maybe that's minus 43 in the depth of winter, plus 42 in the heat of summer. They have tried to transplant Orenburg goats to other places in the world. The French in particular, during the early 1800s, were importing the goat down from Orenburg and thought it would be much better if they could grow it themselves and comb it themselves, cheaper, more industrious and so on. But after just a few years in the region in France, I assume the French Alps, where they were trying to breed them, the goat down became too harsh. So it's particular to the region. We think it's a mixture of the climate and the local vegetation, but it only grows that way on the goats in that region. Of course, it's the goat. The qualities of the goat down are it's very insulating and very warming. It's very absorbent and quick drying. It has skin-friendly lanolin content and a silky lustre and sheen. The goat down from Orenburg goats is 16 to 18 microns in terms of the thickness of the fibre. That is finer than cashmere. Cashmere is 20 to 22 microns. So it's, as far as we know, probably one of the finest fibres, animal fibres that there is, which is goat down from Orenburg goats. Then, of course, Orenburg itself lies on the Eurasian Silk Route. It's along the route from China and Uzbekistan and so on, where they grow silkworms and have a silk industry. It's on the route from there up into Europe. And so it was right on that confluence there, and so of course it had a ready supply of silk. So they ply the goat down with the silk because it adds strength to the goat down. Because the goat down being so fine is not that strong, but when it's plied with silk it makes it super strong. And of course it adds even more lustre and sheen, resulting in a highly prized and now rare yarn. It's really hard to get hold of Orenburg goat down yarn. I've got some Folklore goat down. Folklore's about 500 miles away. And I have this was hand spun for me by a lovely lady in Russia. So let me just take some of this off for you and pass that around so that you can appreciate the fineness of the goat down. Just look at the fibres, and that's not as fine as Orenburg. But the reason for having this is under the Soviet Union, because of the factories, the making of the so on, they introduced Folklore goat down into the shawls that they were making, and I think that's probably in the shawl that we're going to see later, which is Ankaras. The factory spun ones were actually made with Folklore yarn, and because of the colour, white Orenburg goats are actually quite rare. They're mostly black or grey. So Folklore yarn was introduced. So this is the yarn from the Folklore goats. How did you get this then? I did an online search. I actually found someone on Etsy and then contacted her to see.
Oh, it's only you've made an effort.
There we go. In terms of the yarn itself, as I've explained, down is brushed from the, it's actually combed from the goats. And then it's combed on a peculiar thing. You know how we card wool in the UK? They have like, it's a triangular thing with a comb sticking upright on it that they push the yarn down onto and pull it apart. And that's basically how they're combing it to clean it and align the fibres. So it's getting rid of, the goats have what they call guard hair.
Yes.
Yes. So it's getting rid of the guard hair to get to the very fine down.
Do they take the goat off before they comb it?
Do they what? Do what?
Do they remove the goat before they comb the wool?
They're combing the wool off the, they don't shear them, they comb it off the goat.
Off the live goat?
Yes, off the live goat.
And then they comb it?
And then they comb it on the comb. So they comb it, they have like,
worried about the goat.
put on these spikes. What a sight that would be. But yes, they do. They use like the comb that they use to brush it off the goats. It's like got curved things on it, so they're combing it through. It's like you know, a cross between a brush and a comb. Yeah. So they're using it to brush that. It's a bit like you know, brushing a horse or something like that. Yeah. To get Angora rabbits, like brushing an Angora rabbit. That sort of thing. The brushing, combing it off the goat, yeah, and then combing it on this thing, but not the goat. Okay, then they spin it on a supported spindle. You can see one here. I don't know if you can see that, which is in a little bowl, but I have one. In fact, I have two. Look at this. I was so thrilled when that came through the post. There was actually a lot more of this, and I wanted to keep it, but I actually ended up screwing it up and throwing it away because I've got some here. But there we go. So what I have in here, there we go. That's a Russian spindle from Russia, as we've just seen. It goes into that. They sit with that between the legs, and they spin with that in the cup like that. I've tried, I can't do it. Maybe a spinner could do it, but basically that's how they do it. They spin it in like, it's like a spinning top. They're spinning it on like that, yeah?
I'll have a go.
To spin the yarn. So I'll pass that around. I've got another one. They have different spindles. The short, this is a shorter one. It's actually this one that's used to spin the yarn. The longer, larger ones are used to ply it with silk. Which I've just said there, plied with silk. Or cotton for strength. If they're plying it with cotton, that tends to be the thicker yarns that they ply with cotton. And we'll come on to why they have thicker yarns and finer yarns. Okay, right, so let's move on to how they make the shawls, which I'm sure you're really dying to know about now. We've learned all about the history of it. Okay, what they do is they knit the lower border over a few. Have you ever knit a lace edging? It's like they're knitting a lace edging to start with over a few stitches. Now, as you can see here, I did a provisional cast on for mine, but actually they're just cast on and knit. So they've cast on a few stitches and then they've knit up a length of border, much longer. Yes, Anne?
You want right with the lights on?
Oh, would you like to turn them off? Sorry, I should have thought earlier.
Oh, that's a lot better.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
we all
much
right now?
better.
We can do
Yeah.
this now. So across a few stitches, and then they knit the border edge. What's unique, what you'll see is they call it a sawtooth, and traditionally the sawtooth has what they call a 5-pole sawtooth. That means they expand across 5 poles and then they decrease. It's actually a repeat where there are I can't get my head around it. It's too 9. Because it's 5. The hole in the middle counts for both bits of the 5-tooth, if you understand it. You've got 5 going in and then 5 coming out, but the one where the join is the same one. Yeah.
This Russian lady
So it goes zigzags up and down like that, going. So you've got a decreasing number of stitches and then an increasing number of stitches, a decreasing number,
It's got a lot of hair
along
on
one
it.
edge. So there you are. You can see I've got a 2-row line of 5-hole sawtooth. After that, they turn the corner at the low right, and you can't really see it, but I've got to the end of the row and then I've turned the corner. Now I've turned it the way that Galena says to turn it, which is using short rows. I've seen on other forums, and there's a lady whose designs you'll see later called Russian Lily, Lil 2345 on Ravelry, who says that she doesn't know any Orenburg knitters that use short rows. They've never heard of short rows. They just get to the end and turn, you know, and pick it. So what they do is they get to the top of, you know, it would be the top of the long strip, turn and pick stitches up along the edge. So now you can see the edge of that border, the stitches are being picked up along the edge, and then the lower left corner is turned. So now we've got the bottom of the shawl edging, the border that goes along. So we've turned a corner at the right edge, come back, turned a corner at the left edge, to now have stitches on our needle to knit up. The main body and borders are then knit edge to edge. So you do this edge, knit along with pattern in the centre, or whatever it is you're doing in the centre, knit to the other edge, turn, and then you're doing, it's a garter stitch technique. I should have mentioned this earlier. So every row is knit. All the stitches that they use are knit, yarn over, knit 2 together, and sometimes knit 3 together, and a slip stitch. That's all they use. so they knit up the length of the shawl like that. They get to the top, they turn the top corner. Again, I've done this with short rows. And then they start joining in the stitches from the centre. So you can see that I've got a needle going at right angles to each other. I'm knitting at the edge and then joining in a stitch at the top all the way along, which is what I've said there. And then they turn the upper left corner and then they graft the stitches together. I read graft and did a Kitchener stitch. But actually there is a Russian graft. Barbara's got a blog post about the Russian graft, if anybody looks at Barbara's blog. I think you did it for the shoulder up, wasn't it?
Barbara's
yes,
blog
yes.
is called
You
Barbara Knits
basically have 2 rows of
Again.
stitches and you keep putting one over the next.
Her name is Barbara
Yeah.
Smith.
Yeah, it's like a cast off where you're passing one stitch over the needle on the left and passing it back over the stitch on the right and so forth. So it's a bit like zipping up. If you think of it like a zip zips up together, that's what you're doing with the stitches in a Russian graft. Okay? Okay, so that's basically how they make them. And of course they finish it by blocking it on a wooden frame. This design is my new friend on Ravelry, Russian Lily, and this design is called It's a Boy. But you can see that it's been blocked on a wooden frame, which is the reason for having that pitch there. Okay, there are a number of motifs that are traditional within Orenburg lace knitting. About 10 different motifs that most Orenburg knitters are familiar with. And this is how they would be charted in the way that we chart things nowadays. Orenburg knitters, when they're planning a shawl, all they do is show holes. They just show the shape they're making with the holes, where the holes are going to be placed in. And they know how to knit them with the two togethers. So they don't show the two togethers or the three togethers. They just assume the knitter will know how to do that. So their plan of the shawl is literally a plan with holes on it. But as you can see, there's 10 basic designs here. There's chain hearts on the left, mouse print, strawberry, cat's paw, diagonals, fish eyes, more diagonals going the other way, accordion, peas and honeycomb. That is what the mouse print looks like. That's what a strawberry looks like. This is what a cat's paw looks like. You can see it's like a strawberry but with a hole in the middle.
Or a mouse.
Or a mouse. These are diagonals. You'll see that diagonal looks like the one on the right, but actually it is a stitch pattern underneath, and it's to do with the way the stitches lean with the two togethers. That's fish eyes. More diagonals going the other way. Honeycomb. Peas, which looks a little bit like faggoting in the centre, but you can see the ones on the outside look like single holes. And accordion. And then finally, chain hearts. Now I've done quite a few swatches using Galena's method, which I'll pass around. So if you want to pass that around, I've got strawberries at the bottom, mouse prints, accordions, peas, cat's paws, and I'm not sure. So if you want to pass that around, and then I've also got chain hearts. And this is honeycomb. This particular arrangement of honeycomb is called a samovar. So when they put the motifs together, because they can put motifs together and then in a particular design, and then they have a name for that. So that's samovar. They've also got crosses, snowflakes. They've got all these different designs, the basis of which is these patterns here, these simple stitchways. Some of the stitchways, I don't know if you saw them. Let me go back just to show you. Some of the stitchways are just on every other row, so every other row is knit. It's a plain row. Some of the stitch patterns, like accordion and honeycomb, are done on every row, where you're doing yarn overs and two togethers. Okay, so what types of shawl do they have? Look, here we have some lovely Russian ladies at a market trying to sell their hand-knitted shawls, or the kittens that they get for them. A platok, and this is the Russian that I've been learning, is their name for a wrap, really. Platok, we call it shawl. We got used to calling it a shawl. It's a big square, it's a wrap. A shawl is the name for a shawl, but they're interchangeable, the same way that we would interchange wrap and shawl. A palanquin is a stole. Now, they didn't originally make stones. The original lace designs, the ones that went to the London exhibition and all the world exhibitions that were on at the time, they were square ones. They only made square shawls back in the 1700s and 1800s. But it was under the Combinat. The Soviet Union wanted something that was more marketable to wherever, because there weren't just places in the world that were freezing cold. There were places that would like something that was a little bit more easy to take somewhere, more usable. And so they made a stole. And the stoles were typically either what they call 5 diamond or 3 diamond. And that was to do with the number of diamond motifs going through the centre, and we'll come to that as well shortly. My Russian friend has done her best to teach me to say this. Puhovi.
Well done.
Means downy. And you'll come across it later on. Well, I don't know if you will recognise it, but we've got a song later where we use Puhovi. So there we go. But basically, it's all the Orenburg shawls are Puhovi shawls. They're made with goat down. And they also have pautinkas. Now, pautinka literally means web. We call it gossamer, but the word itself actually literally means web, a spider's web. So, pautinkas. And that's not to do with the shape of the shawl or anything, it's to do with the fact that it's so fine as a spider's web. Now, you actually have a mixture of fineness of shawls. You've got pautinkas, which are ultra fine, and those are only really used for special occasions. They're not really warm enough to get them through the depth of the Russian winter in the Ural steppes, but they'd be used for weddings and so on, and traditionally brides would be given them as a gift when they were getting married. They were special, and very expensive, very long time to make them. They would be like this. Ultra fine. The yarn I've got that I made that with is
All those gasps.
it's not actually Orenburg, but I've not got it. Sorry. Is that yours?
Yes.
How come that's in my bag?
I'm sorry.
That's confusing. Sorry. You see why I was confused. This, I'll pass the yarn round. This is the yarn it was knit with. That is, I think I've got the label here, I'll pass the label round as well. Heirloom Knitting Ethereal Cash Silk, which is a 2-ply, 70% cashmere, 30% silk. And there's 25 grams in that ball, which is 1,500 metres.
Wow.
A full-size Orenburg shawl of 180 centimetres by a square, 180 centimetres by 180 centimetres, would take approximately 180 grams. So it's a gram per square centimetre. Really, really fine. Those were that was the standard they had under the Combinat for the finest of their shawls. The book that I passed down, Galena, there's a table in there that has the grading for the shawls that they were making under the Combinat, which gives you the details of what the content was for the different styles. So there were warmer shawls, which were made with much thicker yarn, like the Volgograd yarn that I've passed around. And then there were super fine pautinkas that were spiderweb shawls,
Here we go.
hugely super fine.
This is
The basic style of shawl then, which was tended to be a warm shawl made with heavier yarn to get them through the depth of the Russian winter, has a plain knit garter stitch centre, a bit like a hat shawl, garter stitch centre and a decorative border. They also have what they actually properly call warm shawls, which are very heavily knit, typically knit in the grey Orenburg or black Orenburg goat down, which and they do the best to fluff them up to make them as warm as possible. And if I go back, let me just go back. Can you see? You can't really see. The Russian ladies there have got them. They're wearing them on their heads to keep themselves warm. Yeah, I don't know if you can see the fluffiness of what they're wearing, but the grey, you can probably see it better if you look at the screen afterwards. But it's the grey goat down, and it is just a fairly plain knit wrap that they've wrapped around their headscarf, basically. So that's the basic style, plain centre and decorative border. Then there's the all-over style, where the centre of the shawl has got a repeating design all over it. This design is diamonds by my friend Russian Lily, who my friend, because she said that I was free to use her photos. And therefore this talk is littered with pictures of Russian Lily's designs, but they are beautiful. Another all-over design by Russian Lily, Let It Snow. Now, I don't know if you can see from this picture, but this is actually knit in grey Orenburg go down now. But again, a repeating all-over design. We then have what we call medallion style shawls, which have got a single centre diamond motif shaped in a diamond somehow or other with the stitches that we're using. And those are called medallion style shawls. This one by Russian Lily is Crimson Bells. She's got a blog as well, I think it's called Russian Fibres, spelled the American way, fibres by the way. Then they have, I've got another example, sorry. Summer Symphony by Russian Lily, another medallion style shawl. More intricate than the Crimson Bells that we just saw previously, but again using all of those different motifs put together in such a way as to make a shawl of that beauty. Then they have what they call five diamond style, also called five circle. Now I'm not sure why they call it five circle. I should have been passing these around. I did myself some little mini examples. Look, here we go. Here's an all over. So that's an all over. Hang on a minute.
This is the one that very big all the different patterns samples in it.
Of course you are.
So this has got strawberry and fish eyes and peas.
This would be a medallion style.
Diamonds and honeycomb.
And then it's not as decorative as the others. Then here's my example of a five diamond.
So I'm not sure about the diamonds actually, it might not have diamonds.
So basically, you can really see that the five diamond or five circle shawl, it's basically four diamonds arranged in such a way that there's a centre diamond as well. And quite often, as in this case, the centre diamond has a different design in the centre to the other four diamonds. But beautiful. That's Winter Night by Russian Lily. This is Three Sisters, Mother's Love by Russian Lily. I don't know if you can see, it's sort of got a heart's design around the centre diamonds.
Right,
And then, of course, as I said, under the Soviet Union, started making stoles. So this is an example of a five diamond stole called Fleur de Grace by Russian Lily again. And I should have explained before that the construction of the nature of the shawl is they have what they call centre, and then there's the frame, and in the frame there are normally repeating motifs, so you can see around. So you've got the centre panel there with the five diamonds in it, and around that you've got the frame, which looks to have like a tree of life within a diamond going around it. And then on the edge you've got the sawtooth border edging, which in this case has got 3 rows of 5-hole sawtooth. Then there's a 3 diamond stole, not quite as long, but same principles. Centre with 3 diamonds, a frame with more diamonds going around it, and then the sawtooth edging. Diamonds the Stool by Russian Lily. But they've also developed in more recent times, put them into things that are more usable for the Western world. So here we have an example of a scarf made using the Orenburg tradition of lace. So you can see the border is a 5-hole sawtooth border. You can see that in the centre that I think it's made with mouse prints arranged in a diamond pattern, and then there's some diagonals going on, and then there's mouse prints in the edge of the border as well, just within the 5-hole sawtooth.
Fine thread.
This is Travelling Time by Russian Lily. He started designing shawlettes because in the West we like shawlettes. Traditionally, the big square shawls, they would wear them wrapped around them, or they would fold it to make a triangle shawl and wear it doubled up like that. But the Russian lily and other designers have developed them a little bit, so you can see that this is actually just got a garter stitch that runs along. So it's actually a stole with a section of garter stitch to make it into a shawlette. And that's Let It Snow, shawlette by Russian lily. Let me just see that motif. Do you see the motif at the bottom here? And the one that I've sent around that I've said is like a medallion style little mini shawl. That's the basis of that type of design. Here we have another shawl. This is shawlette using that type, so I've just so you can see it larger, that it's like a stole but with a section of garter stitch to make it into a shawlette. And this is Orenburg Snowflake by Russian Lily. So this design at the bottom is called, in the centre, these diamonds are called a snowflake design. There's lots of different styles of snowflake. I'll pass this one round. That's another style of snowflake. Oh, and oh, sorry, I also made a little mini 5-star diamond palanquin. So, and then crescent shawls. You can see this is mainly garter stitch with an Orenburg border. The 5-hole sawtooth on this is slightly different. It goes and then stops and then starts again to make it a sort of slightly different shape, but it's still a 5-hole sawtooth in that arrangement. This is Blues Bactus by Russian Lily, which looks absolutely gorgeous on my screen, but is lost on there, unfortunately, in terms of the blue. This is a red crescent shawl as well. You can see there's the chain hearts along the top border edging, and then just a simple sawtooth border at the bottom with garter stitch through the middle.
Is she selling these?
She sells the patterns on Ravelry. So if any you can go and buy the patterns. She's had I think there are still a few patterns that are free on Ravelry that she did for knit-alongs. She's got a whole group, and it's great fun going in her group because there's lots of Russians in her group all posting in Cyrillic, and I have no idea what they're saying. But it's a wonderful adventure visiting it, just for that. So this is Whisper of the Heart. Then of course we like triangular shawls. So basically all they've done is taken a traditional style of square and halved it, which gives us a triangular shawl. So you can see there's a centre motif there that's made with trees of life. And a tree of life is basically just an arrangement of diagonals, where we saw the motif earlier for the diagonals, and that's all the tree of life is diagonals with gradually fewer stitches going up. So this is Travelling Time, One Family Story. And then another beautiful red triangular shawl. This one is Youth by Russian Lily. Where have I got to now? Oh, my favourite bit. Oh. Now hopefully you can hear this when I start playing it. It's enmeshed in the heritage of Russia now, is Orenburg shawls. They've got other types of shawl that are sort of like woven, very colourful, decorative shawls, but Orenburg shawls are now enmeshed, and so there's a beautiful folk song that was sung by a very famous Russian opera singer. This is her 80th birthday celebration. The Orenburg State Choir singing the folk song that she made famous to her. So I've got an English translation below, if it works. And finally, questions. Except it's not really finally, because we've yet got an absolute treasure, which is up here, which Anne Harrod brought along, well, sent along last week. And remember I told you to remember that symbol?
Yeah.
That symbol is on this shawl. So this is that symbol there. This is a shawl that was knitted by the Orenburg cooperative, the combinat. We think that the centre was clearly machine knit. It's a traditional basic style. The borders, we don't know whether they were machine knit or hand knit in terms of the frame, but the borders we're fairly sure were hand knit. It looks to be a study in diagonals. Are you happy for this to be passed around, Anne Harrod? Or would you prefer to lay it out somewhere for
I
people
think
to go
laid
look?
out somewhere because there's.
I think we had it on the far table when we brought it in the other week. So shall we pop it down there at the end? But
Yeah, hold it right out if you like. It was bought in St. Petersburg, and we can't really quite remember when, because a friend of mine brought it back. He was going to Russia, and I said, "Oh, bring me back some knitting." And
Good friend.
yes, that's right. And he was in St. Petersburg, and he was went to a market just off the Nevsky Prospect, and he said it wasn't massively expensive, and it wasn't massively cheap. I think it's about £30. I mean, we can't remember quite when. I think possibly in the early 90s. So probably maybe when the sort of Russian infrastructure, USSR, was still possibly in place. I'm not sure. And I did a little bit of translating on the label as well. It's very laborious. You have to set one keyboard up for Russian and another for English, and then you do a bit of cut and pasting, and then you drop it into Google Translate, and it tells you what it says.
well, the shawl itself, and I've checked it with my Russian friend, wherever the label's got to. It's obviously says Orange Shell, which is the factory, Orange Shell factory, and that factory is still working today. And you can go online, and I showed Barbara it last week. I found it last week. I should have maybe look it up later for you. It's all in Russian, their website, so it means nothing, but you can still see this symbol on there, and you can find it by doing a search on Orange Shell. So it's Oren and Shell, S-H-A-L. So, and we've got lots of beautiful shawls on the website, so you can see lots of pictures of the shawls that are being made still now, and it's still being made as the cooperative with, a mixture of machine knitters and hand knitters and whatever. So there we go. It also says Pukov on here, which is, as we know, Pukovi is downy, so we assume Pukov is down. But there's another word for down on here as well, which actually literally means feathers, the word that's used for down on here as well, but it also means down. So you get two translations if you look it up, either feathers or down. And that's it, there we go. So thank you very much, Anne Harrod, for bringing that along.
Oh, we'll pass it round. As long as everybody's careful with it, I'm sure it'll be all right.
Okay.
I'm thinking that yes, I mean, I've never even thought about whether it was machine or hand knitted. And I think possibly the garter stitch base lace must be hand knitted, but it's the centre's machine knitted.
Yeah, I think probably.
Because it doesn't look at all like frame knitted lace, which has a stocking stitch.
No, of course it's all. But that was the thing that Combinat made them to match the traditional style.
Yeah.
So.
Do you know what sort of needles the original knitters used? Do you know what they were doing? Were they mass-produced knitting needles?
Well, I've read the very fine needles, so that the samples that you've seen that I've passed around were knit on 2mm needles. The Russian ones were typically metal, and they started off as double-pointed needles, but they typically melted a bead onto the end of them. So they didn't use knitting sticks or anything like that, so they were knitting them, lengthways. Oh, I've no idea. I just know that they were fine metal needles, started out double-pointed, and then they were put something on the end.
With your lady who knitted very fine things.
With piano
And
wire.
she did with piano wire.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to produce the samples?
I don't know really. You could probably knit. I think each sample, well, the little square ones probably took me about 3 hours each. So I started. When did I start? Early April, I think, knitting samples to get ready for this. So it's over the last sort of 6 weeks or so that I've knit them.
I will look out when I'm in some people
The rest of it, because there's a lot more samples than I've shown you yet. I'm waiting, and once everybody's finished the questions, I'll show you the rest of the square swatches.
Lovely. Well, you could take a photo of the label.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. they don't let us loose. It's very, when we're on a trip, we're on a trip. Yeah.
Did anybody else have a sample? I mean, I did say if anybody had, even though it's very rare, so I wasn't expecting anyone to have some, so I was thrilled when I actually got one. Did anyone else bring something along? Or is I thought not. Oh, no.
It would have been miraculous.
It would be miraculous. I think it would be pretty miraculous. So there we go. So that's it. Thank you, everybody. What time is it? How long was that? Did I manage to do an hour?
Right. Let's drop things down. She did fantastic, didn't she, Sarah? Right, just let me.
Didn't she do well? That was a brilliant talk. Right, I'm just going to talk you through these samples. So here, there's a lot more light here where I'm sitting, isn't there? It's much better. Thank you, Sarah. So this is the diamonds. I'm just going to go through them one by one. This one's gorgeous, isn't it? Now, I'm just trying to remember that in the corner of the border there, she's done a slightly different border here. That's, I'll remember what that is in a minute. Is that peas? I think that's peas, isn't it? That square pattern. Mary, is this square pattern in the border, is that the one that's called peas? Mouse print. So we've got mouse print here in the corner, and then the pattern in the centre is formed of is that cat's paw and diagonals. Is that cat's paw and diagonals in the centre? And strawberries. See, there you go. Diagonals and strawberries and mouse prints. Thank you very much. That's fantastic, wasn't it? Right, here we go. This is lovely. You know, she's done a version of an all-over pattern. That's beautiful, isn't it? So, that's cat's paw. It doesn't look quite the same as the one that I've just put down. But maybe I'm wrong. No, it could just be lots and lots of strawberries. They are stunning, aren't they, Mary? Really, really stunning. And then this one that's the she did a basic, a miniature version of one of the stoles that they did, the 5 diamond stoles. Gorgeous. I'm just going to go and grab for you again so that you see it in full light. It's amazingly fine, so you can see me through it to see how fine it is. Look how amazing. Thank you, Mary. She is, I promise you. Isn't that incredible? That's so fine. You can see me through it. There you go. Worthy of being a bridal veil, that, isn't it? Just incredible. I'm so impressed by that. There you go. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us and seeing the talk tonight. It's been a long time, but it was extremely informative, wasn't it? Amazing. Can't tell you what you'll be. Oh, he was impressed. Very good. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to sign out. Oh no! Let's see if we can show you the shop because it's a variety I might show you the spindles in greater detail. Here we are. You can see some more detail of the actual Orenburg shawl. that our friend Anne Harrod's friend, she said it was called Peter. Now let's find the label. Just punch it out, find it, there it is. And there's the, those of you that have been watching since the beginning will recognise that symbol. That symbol was in the talk at the beginning of the talk earlier on. Mary showed us this symbol. There you go. Beautiful. The centre's all garter stitch. Beyond there, the rest of the centre square is garter stitch. Right, that's it. I'm going to say goodbye. I'll see you all on Monday. I'm broadcasting at my usual time in the afternoon from my knitting room on Monday. I am at some point going to the ladies here in Guild before Mary's talk. They talked about various other things that are going on in the Guild. We're having an open week at the archive, which is close to here. And I think I might do it during that open week. I'm going to go over to the archive because they've got a lot of Yorkshire knitting sticks apparently. So I want to look at what they've got in their collection. I'm going to take my iPad with me and broadcast from the archive. We'll look at a lot of knitting sticks together, original antique knitting sticks. Okay, thank you very much everybody. We'll see you later. Bye.